About our speaker, Alex Newman is an award-winning international journalist. Mr. Newman has authored and co-authored several books, including Crimes of the Educators, an expose of government schools. He is the president of Liberty Sentinel Media and serves on advisory boards for several education-focused organizations. In 2019, Alex and a coalition of Christian leaders formed Public School Exit, a ministry working to rescue children from government schools. With that in mind, the title of his presentation, Get Your Kids Out of Government Schools. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alex Newman.
Hey everybody, thank you very much for being here. Start with some bad news. Got to turn this on. So, my grandpa, lifelong Republican, voted for Republicans in every election, proud to vote for Trump, and then in this last election, voted for Joe Biden. And it's crazy what happened. Well, what we say is that never would have happened if he was still alive. Only half kidding. So we do need to stop H.R. 1. And the horrible thing is that even if we do manage to restore honest elections, even if we do manage to get election integrity back into our laws, over the long term, we're going to lose all of the elections if we continue allowing our children to be indoctrinated to hate America, to hate their parents, to hate God, to hate the church. That's just a fact, and I've got the data to back it up. Let's see if we can get, there we go. So here's the political data. This was a survey that came out in 2019 by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, a scientific poll, and what they found was that 70% of my generation, millennials, say they're going to vote for socialists in the future, okay? Socialism is basically the opposite of Christianity on almost every point, and we'll keep coming back to this, but 70% of my generation, if you look at the Electoral College map in the recent elections, Donald Trump would have gotten 3 electoral votes if only millennials voted. And it's always embarrassing to admit you're a millennial because then everybody assumes you're an idiot. So I'm sorry, not all of us are that way, but it's not wholly unjustified. Now, the religious data is pretty terrifying as well. Millennials will be the first generation in all of American history where a majority says they're non-Christian. So Christians are officially in the minority among millennials, first time that's ever happened in American history, and the numbers are sinking like a rock. And then if you drill down into that minority that describes themselves as Christian, what you'll find is only a minority of them are actually saved and true Christians. Okay, a lot of them just identify that way because that's what their parents told them or they grew up that way. This is coming from a country where we had, at one point, 99% of people were Christian. Right? George Barna's latest survey showed 6% of people have a biblical worldview, coming from a past where we had nearly 100% of people, even non-Christians, having a biblical worldview. So we are in some very, very big trouble, and I submit to you that the entire blame for this can be put at the feet of government education and everything that goes with that, and I'll prove it to you today. Hitler was a monster, and he was wrong about pretty much everything, but he was right on one thing, okay? And almost all the totalitarians of the 20th century understood this. If you want to have total power, you've got to go for the kids, right? You guys are the bitter clingers. You remember that's what Obama called you because you cling to your guns and you cling to your Bibles. They know that, right? Hitler understood that the older generation was the bitter clingers, and so they always go for the kids. And so this quote actually came up at the Nuremberg trials. It's a true story. They said, "He alone who owns the youth will gain the future." Okay, and that is a fact. That is why they've been so ruthlessly targeting the children. That's why Adolf Hitler became the first world leader in human history to make it a crime for parents to educate their own children at home. They wanted to stick a wedge between the parents and the children, divide the families. First, the kids all had to be brainwashed at government school. Then they had to go to the Hitler Youth and all the rest of it. And this kind of program to separate children from their families is coming to America. And I brought the receipts. So I've got a lot of videos, and I'm going to show you, because I don't want anybody to take my word for this stuff. I'd rather you see it from them. So here is Melissa Harris.
Never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
All right, yeah, your kids belong to the whole community, okay? And that's what they think. That's what they think. Now, the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services, this was during Obama's administration, they put out a policy document, and they said parents could be equal partners with the federal government in the raising of their own children. And then as you read the fine print, you see they don't mean equal partners at all. The parents will be the junior partners as long as they do what the federal government wants and says, then we're okay. If they don't, they need mandatory parenting classes, and if they still won't, then they're going to lose their kids. Okay, this is all right in the policy document. This is what they believe. Arne Duncan spent 7 years as Obama's Secretary of Education. He wants some of your kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And all the rest of them, they need to be in government schools for 12, 13 hours every day. Listen.
Home. And there are certain kids we should have 24/7 to really create a safe environment and give them a chance. I think all of our schools should be community centers. Our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school.
Yeah. That's what they want, right? And in fairness, they've been sounding this drum for a long time. Hillary Clinton wrote this book more than 20 years ago. It takes a village to raise your children. And if you read the book, you see it doesn't actually take a village. It takes a government village to raise your children. That's what they think, okay? Now, before we get into the specifics of what's going on, I want to point out that there is an actual agenda here. These people who are doing this have an objective, and ultimately we know who their commander-in-chief is. But I want to let them speak for themselves rather than tell you what the agenda is. I'll just let them speak. So here we go.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be,
right. They got your kids.
We have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
So a world where the rule of law will govern the conduct of nations, a world where a credible United Nations will use its peacekeeping role. He's talking about their troops, the goobers with the blue helmets, famous for atrocities all over the world, will implement the vision of the UN's founders. And that's a very revealing statement. We know who the UN's founders were. After World War II, Stalin sent a gentleman by the name of Molotov. He's the guy who signed the pact with Adolf Hitler's regime to carve up Europe. You enslave those, we'll enslave these, and then we'll all live happily ever after. On our side, we sent a senior bureaucrat from the Department of State named Alger Hiss, and they really, really liked him. That should have been our first red flag. They made him the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the United Nations. Then we put him on trial, and we threw him into federal prison because we found out he was an agent of Joseph Stalin. He was a spy, okay? A communist spy from America and a minion of Joseph Stalin, one of the worst mass murderers in human history, created this abomination. And we have a president of the United States saying we'll give up the vision of our founders and move toward a world where the UN's founders' vision is what is implemented. Now, I don't want to just sound like I'm picking on Republicans. There are plenty of Democrats on board. Here is Bill Clinton.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Okay. And Beijing Biden.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could do this for a week. I could show you all the different world leaders saying we need a new world order. They all agree, right? The whole swamp agrees they need a new world order. And I submit to you that their primary tactic is going to be the indoctrination of our children. And it's not just me saying that. They themselves admit it. So they have this ideology they call sustainable development. And we're going to get into this in a moment, and you'll understand why it's so relevant. Basically, if you want to understand it, just take everything the Bible teaches and turn it exactly upside down. So the Bible teaches private property rights. God said, thou shalt not steal. Pretty clear. Don't steal people's stuff. They're teaching our children that private property is at the root of social injustice. We need to redistribute everybody's wealth by stealing it first. Okay? Bible says, thou shalt not murder. They're teaching our children that it is totally wonderful and safe and effective if we decide to murder our unborn babies. Okay, the Bible teaches that God is the author of nations. In fact, God says in the Old Testament and the New Testament, He divided up the world into nations because He wanted it that way. Well, now they're teaching our kids that borders are racist. We've got to get rid of nation states and just be one big, happy, UN-minded family. And on and on. I'll show you guys some more examples as we go through this, but on almost every issue, almost all the time, they come down exactly on the wrong side of all the issues. Now, they actually have concrete international agreements that have been agreed to by every government on planet Earth to bring all this about. In 1992, George Bush went down to Rio de Janeiro with the United Nations. Every government on the planet signed up for an agreement called Agenda 21. Most Americans don't know what Agenda 21 is. If you watch CNN, they told you it's a conspiracy theory. Apparently they don't know the definition of the term. So let's watch real quick.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration.
Okay, so Bush liked it. Again, every government on the planet signed this. Here's the leader of the Communist Party in Congress.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. HCON Res 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the...
All right, so you get the point, right? Both sides of the swamp coin agree we need a new world order. Agenda 21 and these international sustainability agreements will be at the heart of this. Now, why are we talking about this in a talk on education? Well, first, one more thing on how serious this is. This is the summary that the UN itself gave of Agenda 21. They say it needs to be implemented by every person on the planet. Notice there's no exemptions for homeschoolers in Illinois or Missouri. Okay, every person on the planet, and it's also going to require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Right? You'd think this would be something that we ought to be talking about, right? A profound reorientation of society. Now, again, they know that you're the bitter clingers, right? So, what is their strategy? They've got all these bitter clingers in America and all over the world. What are they going to do? Well, open up the agreement. You can find it on the UN's webpage. Go to chapter 36, and they outline their strategy right there. Education is, and I'm quoting here, critical for promoting sustainable development. In fact, they say it's indispensable for giving children the right attitudes, values, and beliefs. Okay? They also say that it's critical to give them the right values, attitudes, beliefs. They say it's got to include spiritual education, and we'll come back to that. They don't mean what you might think they mean, and they say it's got to be integrated into all disciplines, okay, not just in social studies or civics or history. It's got to be in science and in math and in English and in every single subject. This is their strategy, folks. They're telling you in their own international agreements that have been signed by every government on the planet that brainwashing your children is the central element of their strategy for bringing this about. Now, here's a book that the UN created. I've actually got a copy in my office. It's produced by UNESCO, and it's a children's edition of Agenda 21. It's being used in government schools all over the world, not just here in America. I don't know if you can see the picture there, but you've got the deities. I don't know if they're Hindu or what, but they're sitting up on the clouds, and they're very upset because all these storks are delivering all these babies. Now, we know what God says about babies. Babies are a blessing, right? Children are a blessing. In fact, one of the first commands that God gave us was to be fruitful and to multiply. It wasn't like if you feel like it or once you reach 7 billion, stop. That was an order. Be fruitful and multiply. So what does the UN, remember what I said? They teach the opposite of the Bible? On the very next page, in commenting on this image, they tell you why the deities are so upset. The earth groans every time it registers another birth. That's what they're teaching your children. This is a UN book used in government schools all over the world to introduce children to Agenda 21. Okay? More recently, they got Agenda 2030. Barack Obama and every other government on the planet signed this. It's basically Agenda 21 Redux. And again, right in the preamble, they'll tell you the strategy. Your children are going to be the critical agents of change. They're going to use this to build a better world. And that sounds nice until you realize what they mean by better world, until you realize that the Communist Party of China, by its own admission, played a critical role in coming up with Agenda 2030. So goal number 10 in Agenda 2030, there's 17 so-called sustainable development goals. They say we've got to redistribute wealth, we've got to reduce inequality. It's only going to be possible if we share the wealth. And that sounds cute until you realize we've seen this movie before, haven't we? Stalin, Castro, Mao, Lenin, Pol Pot, I mean, every mass-murdering communist dictator of the last 100 years used exactly this rhetoric, right? God said, thou shalt not steal. They say, we're going to redistribute your stuff, which means we're going to steal it, okay? That's where they're coming from. And you can read the whole thing. It's an abomination. Now, they also tell you in goal number 4 that your children are the target. They say that brainwashing your children is going to be critical. They say that actually your kids need to be so brainwashed, they won't just passively submit to this new world of sustainable development. They will actively promote it. Okay, and I'm going to show you what this indoctrination looks like. Here's a video that UNESCO produced emphasizing the importance of education in bringing about this new world. Listen.
We achieve sustainable development that protects our planet and builds a more inclusive, equal, and peaceful world without education. We can't. Sustainable development begins with education. Put global education first.
Global education. And we still thought the battle was at our local school boards, right? Now, they've become very, very effective at this, and I want to show you. They've been practicing this for 100 years. They are masters at changing the way your children think. In fact, one of the guys who helped pioneer this, Benjamin Bloom, he would brag that in 1 hour he could undo everything that parents had tried to do in 16 years. So I want to show you how they do this, and I want to show you that they plan far in advance. In the early 1990s, if you had told somebody that we were going to soon be celebrating so-called homosexual marriages, you would have been laughed out of the room. It would have been preposterous. Sodomy was still a crime across most of the United States. That wasn't struck down until the early 2000s by the Supreme Court. But they were planning in advance. Here's a documentary they showed to children all over this country, first grade, second grade, third grade. It's called It's Elementary, talking about gay issues at school. Listen to the little clip from this documentary.
Let me tell you quickly the background. Today, the law says that if you're the same sex, 2 men and 2 women, you can't get married. It is against the law. And I thought that it might be kind of fun for us to sort of be pretend judges for a few minutes. What I'm going to give each of you is a sheet that just tells you that some people think that it's wrong for gays to get married, that it's not natural, and that it goes against what a family is. Other people think that the state should not decide these things, that it should just be up to 2 adults to decide what they want to do. What do you think the answer to these questions are? Should gays be allowed to marry? Should they not?
Yeah, and then all the little kids, oh yeah, how mean that we don't let loving gay people get married, right? As Christians, we know that marriage is a representation of the relationship between Christ and the church, okay? To suggest that a sodomy-based relationship can be equivalent or even equal to a marriage is preposterous. It's blasphemy. And they knew that they could never pass this by asking you bitter clingers. In fact, they tried in California, the land of fruits and nuts, and people said, no, thank you. God's definition is adequate. We'll be fine with that, thank you. So what did they do? They went for your kids, right? They taught them to think, let's be pretend judges. What do we do about this mean old discriminatory law banning loving gay people from getting married? And it worked, right? Didn't take more than a generation and a half till we were celebrating so-called homosexual marriages. Now we've fallen to drag queen story hours. Obviously, that's a man wearing some demon horns, so you'd know where it came from, straight from the pit of hell, obviously. And they're going to, you go to their website, they're bragging that they're in government schools all over this country, kindergartens, first grade, second grade, teaching your kids about LGBT-ism. Okay? They're proud of it. Now here we have Portland public school teachers marching in a pride parade, walking the dogs, drag children on TV on Good Morning America, one of the most mainstream shows out there. In the interest of time, we'll skip it. But now I want to show you guys what they're teaching the kids now. There's a real heavy emphasis on this. And you know, I was in school in the early 90s, and when I was in school, we learned that carbon dioxide was the gas of life. Actually, humans exhale about 2 pounds of it every day. Plants use it for photosynthesis. It's a wonderful thing, a wonderful cycle that God has created. You know, older people understand this. Well, what are they teaching young people? They're teaching them that carbon dioxide, the gas you exhale, is a toxic pollution that's going to cook the planet unless we let the UN tax and regulate it. So from a scientific perspective, this is preposterous. I interviewed Trump's climate advisor, Dr. Will Happer of Princeton University. He said the Earth is starving for more CO2. Plants are designed, he said, to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2 as we have right now. That's why farmers pump it into their greenhouse. Okay? But from a totalitarian perspective, this is brilliant. If CO2 is pollution and everything that produces CO2 needs to be taxed and regulated, there's nothing you can do. And I mean nothing. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't drink, can't turn on a light switch, can't start your car, you can't even die, okay, without being subject to the UN's rules, regulations, and taxes on CO2. So let's look at what this looks like in a classroom.
You've heard the reports. The globe's warming. It's our fault, and the consequences will be terrible. Children are frightened.
I worry. My mom worries. The water might rise and it might flood the whole town.
We won't be able to survive for long.
What are you most worried will happen?
We'll all die.
Are there some people who say this isn't true?
Yes. Yes.
Might they be right?
No.
How do you know they're not right?
Well, because the earth is getting hotter.
Where do you learn this?
Can't you see?
I know it looks like somebody in a public school in my state of Florida.
It's doing it. Can't you see? Oh, can't you see? What global warming is doing to me?
One of the main components after educating the students of global warming is that they're given a letter for their families to sign, and it's this is the congressman.
Okay.
You think the purpose of education?
And and then you give them a letter to sign for their congressman, okay? That's what's happening, folks. They're turning your kids into little political activists, and they will wage war on your freedom, on your country, on your Constitution, on your family. We'll see more examples. Now, Charlotte Iserbyt has become a good friend of mine. She was Ronald Reagan's senior policy advisor on education until she started leaking all these documents about how they were merging the U.S. and Soviet systems. She said, that's a crazy idea. Why would we do that? So she didn't last too long there. But she explains in this clip that people think they're sending their kids to school to learn how to read, write, and do math. That's not what's happening. They're going there to be fundamentally transformed. Now, the next...
You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students.
So the next clip I want to show you, this is Shirley McCoon. She was hired by the U.S. Department of Education in the late 80s to start developing national standards and national curricula. She was with the Mid-Continental Educational Research Laboratory. And she is a wackadoodle of the highest order. I'll show you a book she wrote in a moment. But here she is speaking to all 50 of the nation's governors at a summit convened by George H.W. Bush. Listen carefully to what she says.
Fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society.
A total restructuring of our society. And she goes on, a total transformation of everything. Okay. Now listen to the role of the schools in this total transformation.
The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is, and then move back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of school.
Anticipatory socialization, social change function of school. I thought they were going there to learn how to read and write. See, you got it all wrong. That's not what they're doing. And you don't have to believe me. I'll show you the government's data later. This is one of the books she wrote. It's called The Light Shall Set You Free, and it's not the light that you're thinking about, okay? She claimed to be in communication with these spiritual entities she called ascended masters, and we'll come back to them. If you've opened up your Bible, you know these aren't actually ascended masters, okay? We'll come back to them. But I just want to show you that there's a pattern here, that all these people involved at the highest levels of our education system are into some very weird stuff. Now, what does this fundamental transformation look like? I'm just going to give you a couple of just quick points so that you can see what this transformation is looking like and where it's going to go. Now, in Minnesota, you remember that whole equal partner thing? In Minnesota, we got to see up close and personal what that looks like. So a little boy decided he was actually a little girl. Mom, can I have a sex change, please? No, son, that's ridiculous. Get on the bus. Well, the other equal partner in this relationship, the public school, knew better than the mom, so they actually took this child to a medical facility, and I use that term loosely, and they castrated him. They gave him what's called a sex change, and they filled him with hormones, and now there's a federal lawsuit about it, but guess what? You can't put the pieces parts back, right? That ship has sailed. In California, I actually downloaded this right from the Department of Education's website. It's called a gender transition plan and an individual support plan. So the children at school, they can fill out this form. No, my mommy and daddy don't know that I'm a transgender. Yes, I want help getting hormones. Yes, I want you to get me scheduled for a surgery. And again, on this form, if your parents don't agree to this madness, then the school will hide this from the parents. You can be called, Sally, when you're at school by your teachers, and then when your parents come to school, then suddenly your name will be David again. Okay, that's where they're going with this. And I was talking about this in Florida not long ago, and a school board member from a rural conservative county said, oh my goodness, they're doing that same thing here. This is everywhere, folks. California Health Education Framework, and Illinois is probably just as bad. They've got a book for 5-year-olds called Who Are You? There are infinite genders. The doctor who assigned you a gender at birth didn't know what he was talking about. You could be agender, bigender, trigender, nous trois, free spirit, a whole bunch of things I can't even pronounce. And if you disagree, if you're one of those bitter clingers, you're a bigot and a hater. Okay? This is what they're teaching 5-year-old kids. Okay? Now, some of the stuff that goes on in middle school, I can't even show you. It's too disgusting. The National Education Association, largest union in America, 3+ million members, teamed up with the most vicious LGBT organization in America, the Human Rights Campaign. They're the folks behind the Equality Act that was mentioned earlier. They want to shut down and persecute your churches and your pastors if they won't bow the knee to the golden idol of LGBTism. So the NEA and the Human Rights Campaign put out this video. They sent it to every one of their members through their newsletter. Listen to what they're teaching the teachers.
Hi, your name is Emma?
Yes.
Correct? And my name is Zim. What pronouns do you use?
I use she, they, them.
Cool.
What pronouns do you use?
I use they, them, and also just Z. And so instead of being a boy or a girl or something undefined or in the middle, I kind of like just use my name. You know, my name is Zim. So if you just use Z instead of a pronoun, it's like more personalized and like less fitting into a binary. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just for future reference, guys, my preferred pronouns are Your Royal Majesty. So, and you know, there's going to be consequences for people who misgender people and use the wrong pronouns. Okay, that's already coming. It's already happening in schools and in college campuses. Now, look at how mainstream this has become, right? Do you have to teach your teachers about your pronouns? Oh, no, they all know. Listen.
You said it's cool when teachers ask pronouns? That was never a thing when I was like in elementary school or even middle school. Did you find that you had to like ask for that or like even educate your teachers?
Well, when I had a substitute, sometimes I had to.
Only when there's a substitute. All the other teachers know you have to ask people their pronouns, and you got to use the right pronouns, okay? True story, guys. Now, this is really effective, okay? I grew up in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. I literally grew up with every type of kid you could ever imagine. Hindus, Buddhists, Shintos, black, white, purple, every kind of kid you could imagine. Never in my entire childhood did I meet a boy who didn't understand he was a boy. Never in my entire childhood did I meet a girl who didn't know she was a girl. Didn't happen. The word transgender wasn't in the dictionary, and this was in the 90s, okay? Well, fast forward to today. The University of California at Los Angeles just released a study a couple years ago. They found that 27% of California's children ages 12 through 17 are self-described gender non-conforming. So they're boys who don't accept they're boys or girls who don't accept that they're girls. 27%, okay? Give it another 10 years, maybe we'll be at 50%, and then maybe we'll have the sense to say, wait a minute, what are you guys doing to those kids at the school? Right? And the people who live in conservative districts, I hear this all the time when I talk around the country. Well, you know, that's in Illinois and California and New York. That doesn't happen in Kansas or Nebraska. Oh, well, Utah, one of the most conservative states in the union. I was there in March 2020, right before the COVID tyranny descended on us. And I was meeting with some of their top education officials, and they gave me this data. There has been, in the state of Utah, a 10,000% increase in the number of minor girls going through what they call gender transition. So they're pumping them full of puberty blockers, hormones, testosterone. They're getting them ready or even giving them mastectomies, chopping their breasts off, mutilating their genitals. 10,000% increase in 5 years, folks. And it's not in the water. It's not even from Hollyweird. The real root of this problem is what they're being taught in the government school system, and it's everywhere, guys. Okay, the final frontier, right? The last taboo, children. You didn't think they would go there? Well, they will, and they already are doing it. Okay, in California, in 2016, they passed the mandatory LGBT brainwashing act, and they call it the history. And so all the kids are supposed to learn about the history of the LGBT movement. So I actually got a copy of this curriculum. It was being used. It's a PowerPoint presentation. They start off with Harvey Milk, the child rapist, some of whose victims went on to kill themselves, got elected with the help of Jim Jones, the notorious cult leader, and then he was shot by a Democrat, so supposedly he's a hero. Well, they start with him, and then they go on to ancient Greece, and they just kind of casually throw it out there. Oh, yeah, ancient Greek men used to have lots of sex with boys. Like, well, no big deal. And so this mother said, what are you teaching to my kids? She went to the assistant superintendent of curricula for this district and said, why are you teaching my kids pedophilia? What's wrong with you people? And notice, I'll show you the clip in a minute. She doesn't deny that that's what they're doing. Just listen carefully to what she says about why it's necessary to teach your kids about child rape.
Don't tell me why you're teaching pedophilia in school to ninth graders. Teaching what? Pedophilia. Pederasty, right here.
Pederasty, as I've discussed with you before, twice in my office when you come to view the materials, I've explained to you that this is done because we are talking about historical perspectives of how gender relations and different types of sexual orientations have existed in history. So this is something...
A man and a boy is a sexual orientation.
Something that's occurred in history, and so this is really important for us to include.
Hey, come on, guys. Different gender orientations and sexual orientations have existed through history, so it's really important that we think about what this means, guys. When this was filmed, 26 states had laws banning discrimination against someone based on their sexual orientation. Okay, now it's all 50. Thank you, pretend judges on the Supreme Court. So what happens when these little kids, I mean, we all recognize it would be insane to put a pedophile in charge of the Sunday school ministry or the kindergarten, right? It'd be criminal. And yet what happens when these kids get out of school? They were taught that raping children is just a different sexual orientation. How dare you discriminate against those poor pedophiles? That's just their sexual orientation, right? You can't change that. That's what they're teaching the kids. And there's a pattern. Here's another school in California. Pedophilia is sexual orientation. This is what they're teaching your kids all over America right now. Now, UNESCO, the UN educational agency, they actually in 2018 put out global standards for sex education. It would blow your mind. 5-year-olds need to learn about things that I would never discuss in polite company. Never, not in a million years. By the time they're 9, they need to defend safe and legal murder of unborn babies. Okay, in kindergarten, they're supposed to understand homosexual parenting and gender fluidity. And then when they've got a whole section in the back, Q&A. So what about when grumpy religious leaders and parents come and confront you about this? Oh, then you tell them it's an evidence-based program. Okay, interesting. Then they've got all the evidence. They've got all kinds of citations in the back. You turn to the back. Where's the evidence from? 23 citations from Planned Parenthood, the largest butcher of unborn babies in the United States. That's why we have to do this to your kids, okay? That's where they're going, folks. And it all goes back to this guy, Alfred Kinsey, one of the most sick people who has ever existed on the planet, responsible for the rape and sexual torture of hundreds, maybe thousands of children, some months-old babies. They kept meticulous data and recorded it in their books. These are the quack pseudoscientists who decided that children were sexual beings from birth and that government schools needed to sexualize them from the moment they could get their hands on it. I won't get into much more detail than that because it would make you sick and you'd need barf bags. But these people are sick. These are the people who made the argument that we need to sexualize the kids in schools, and they are winning. SICUS, the Sex Education Information Council of the United States, was formed right after this to propagate the teachings of this sicko. Okay. Now, we still have the idea that our kids are learning, that they're being educated. They're not, folks. Okay, Common Core, you guys probably heard about that. They put 2 subject matter experts on the Common Core Validation Committee. These are the Common Core people, right? They put 2 experts, one in English, one in math. I know them both. I serve on some boards with them. They're very nice people, but we disagree on national standards. But listen to what they said. The only English expert, Dr. Stan Drostotsky, said, I'm not going to sign off on these standards. We're taking out all the great literature. We're dumbing down the kids. We're reducing their ability to think critically. I'm not signing off on that, period. Only English expert. Then we get to the only math expert, Dr. James Milgram of Stanford University. Same thing. I can't sign off on this. They're as non-challenging as possible. They have extremely serious failings. There are actual errors in the math. So let's mandate them in all 50 states. Okay? True story. Okay? The federal government knows this is making your kids dumber. They funded a study by a group called CSAIL that found significant negative effects from Common Core on the education of your kids. They said the magnitude of these negative effects gets worse over time. Okay? The longer the kids are subjected to this, the dumber they're going to get. We've got next generation pseudoscience standards brought to you by the Common Core people. Get this, 12 years of so-called science education, your kids will never hear the term scientific method. Not once, if the standards are followed. Why? Because if they did, they might know that the gender stuff and the climate stuff makes absolutely no sense. So you can't have them knowing the scientific method. Instead, they're taught that they came from slime and that there is no God, through monkeys, of course, and that the climate is going to be cooked if we don't give all our money and all our freedom to the UN. And finally, the idea that gender is a social construct. There are infinite genders. It's all pseudoscience, of course, but that's what they want to teach your kids. They've got absolute fake history in the classroom. You guys are familiar with some of it. Stacy and some of the other speakers earlier today gave a phenomenal talk on that, so I won't dwell on that. And now to the issue of our kids being educated. You know, your average parent that sends their kids to a government school, they think their kids are going there to learn how to read, write, and do math. I'm here to tell you that they're not. Okay? But I don't want you to believe me. I want to point you to the government's own data. So the federal government, every 2 years, they do what's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They take a representative sample of students from all across the country and they give them tests. These are their results from 2019, the latest set that's available. Less than 1/3 of 8th graders are proficient in math. Mind you, they're not good at math, they're not excelling, they're barely making the most dumbed-down standards we've ever had in our entire history. Okay, I'd be embarrassed if my 1st grader couldn't become proficient on these 8th grade standards, and yet not even 1/3 of 8th graders, okay? Just 1/3 of 8th graders are proficient in English, 1/4 of high school seniors are proficient in math, and 1/3 of high school seniors are proficient in English. Okay, imagine like a plumber. Imagine this plumber, less than 1/3 of his customers actually got their pipes fixed. Imagine a burger joint, and imagine that less than 1/3 of this burger joint's customers actually got the burger that they paid for. Most of them got a smelly rat that made them sick. And then they said, oh, just give us more money. Then we'll fix your pipes. Then we'll give you a burger. You'd say, wait a minute, that's a crime. That's fraud. We're taking you to court and suing you, and then we're going to refer you to the Attorney General so that they can prosecute you for defrauding people. Yet this is exactly what the government school system is doing right now. Here is the Deputy Secretary of Education explaining exactly what I just explained.
The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, which is called America's Report Card, reports that two-thirds, get this, two-thirds of American 8th graders are not proficient in any core subject.
Two-thirds of 8th graders are not proficient in any core subject. English, science, math, reading, writing, nothing. Okay, they know all about gender theory. They know all about that we're going to die from global warming, but they don't know anything about the things that parents actually think they're going to school to learn. Okay, this is beyond unacceptable. We've got to disabuse ourselves of the notion that our children are getting an education at the public schools. They're not. And you don't have to believe me. The government itself will tell you that. Okay? Now, what are they doing? Well, they're going on field trips to mosques. They're bowing down to Allah. They're writing out the Shahada, the Islamic conversion prayer. It's happening everywhere. Tennessee, West Virginia, everywhere. They're having to write out that Allah is the only deity and Muhammad is his messenger. Right? What about separation of church and state? Yeah, we got it all over. Here's 5 pillars of Islam on the wall at a school in Kansas. They got mindfulness education in government schools all over the nation. This is Buddhism, and Buddhists will happily tell you that this is Buddhism. So will the mindfulness education people. Okay, they've got Hinduism in all the classrooms. They call it yoga. And I mean, some of the rituals, I was reading the Chicago Tribune just a couple of days ago. They had this weird ritual where they turned the lights down and closed all the windows, and they started incense up, and they put a picture of some guy at the front, and they were throwing orange peels and flowers, and it's part of some Hindu ritual in a government school classroom right here in Illinois. Okay? They're also summoning ancestor spirits. We're doing seances in class now. This is a Black Lives Matter training program at Howard University where they're teaching teachers how to teach other teachers how to teach kids about how Black Lives Matter. Listen to what they're actually doing.
And I'm going to ask you to hold an ancestor in your head right now. Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. Now call out your ancestors into the room, loud so we can hear you. Ella Baker.
Ancestors into the room.
It only took us.
Okay, you should see what the Bible has to say about those things. It's not good. Okay. Now, the U.S. Department of Education funded this paper on how do we get rid of the Christian privilege in our school. You know, that Christian privilege where they're teaching kids the 10 Commandments and the Lord's Prayer. Wait, no, that's not happening, right? Well, one of the ways they can do it is they can infuse the curriculum with Islamic thought. True story. Okay? In North Carolina, right, this is happening even in conservative states, they had the little Christian kids stand up in front of the classroom and apologize for their Christian privilege. They also made the children of European descent go up and apologize for their European privilege. And I'll just say this about critical race theory. I just wrote a big article about it in the Epic Times, and I included this information in there. But the thing that really struck me, I mean, it's a monstrosity, it's an abomination. I just got Vodi Balcom's book, and I read half of it on the way up here. I can't recommend it highly enough. But this is what stuck with me. I serve on a board with a Chinese immigrant to the United States named Lily Tang Williams, wonderful lady. And she told me I had to speak out on this critical race theory stuff because when I got here from China, I had been brainwashed into exactly this way of thinking, and now I'm seeing the same thing happen in America. She said during Chairman Mao's days, they herded all the children into these indoctrination centers that they called public schools, and they told them there's 2 categories of people. There's the red classes and the black classes. The black classes were the bad ones. They were the ones that were counter-revolutionaries, landowners, business owners, middle class, people who were educated. Those were the black classes. They were the bad oppressor classes. Then there was the red classes, the landless peasants, the revolutionary soldiers, the Mao supporters, etc. And you were born into one of the 2 classes. And they would force the little children to stand up in front of the class and apologize for being part of the black classes. And the kids would have to do these self-criticisms, and they would have to denounce their parents and their family. And she said it didn't take long before the blood of millions of people was running in the streets. It's an old Marxist tactic. They've weaponized it a little bit differently for the United States context, but it's the same exact principle. As Stacy pointed out, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. That's what our Lord Jesus Christ taught. They're absolutely correct. They want to divide us so they can conquer us. Okay. Now, it's gotten so crazy. Okay, if you guys have read the Old Testament, this will make you really think. America was once a country that knew God. Now, in California, just a few weeks ago, the State Board of Education voted unanimously to approve a new ethnic studies model curriculum. As part of this curriculum, children in elementary school will be chanting to the demonic Aztec deities of cannibalism and war and human sacrifice. Okay? I grew up in Mexico City. I spent 7 years there, more time than I ever lived any other place. I went to those pyramids at Tenochtitlan more times than I can count, and everybody knows that what they would do there is they would take up captured people, prisoners, slaves, children, chop out their hearts, sacrifice them to these deities. I mean, I knew the names of these deities when I saw it, and then pray that these deities would bless them while they went out and conquered more people. Okay? Children in California, now mandatory, part of this ethnic studies curriculum, will be chanting to these same deities, and these deities are going to be asked to give help with critical consciousness, liberation, unbelievable. They're supposed to ask these deities for help becoming warriors for social justice. One of the guys who wrote this curriculum goes by the name of Cuauhtémoc. It's a name he stole from a very prominent Mexican Indian. He actually wrote in a book before this curriculum was adopted that the Aztec deities should be asked for help waging a counter-genocide against Christians in America. Okay? So what happened when God's people in ancient Israel went whoring after other gods and started sacrificing their children and worshiping Moloch and Baal? A lot of bad things, right? And I submit to you that we may be headed in the very same direction. Now, part of the way they get kids to buy into all this is a very sophisticated tactic, and it's just one example I could show you. But they did this to me, and it had a profound impact on my life, so I want to share it with you. It's called values clarification. The UN promotes this, says it should be used all over the world. They say it helps undermine child's belief in right and wrong. Why would you want to do that? Okay, well, I think I have a good idea why. So this is how it worked. I'm sitting in class and the teacher tells us, hey, you're all in a ship and the ship is sinking. You've all got to jump off into a lifeboat, but oops, 11 people jumped into your lifeboat and there's only space for 10. So you've got a doctor and a teacher and a lawyer and an Indian chief. Who are you going to murder? Who are you going to kill so that you can all survive? It's for the greater good, after all, right? Everybody knows the correct answer, right? Lawyer. No. Just kidding. There's a great lawyer here, too. I'm just messing around. If the kids were thinking, they'd put on their thinking caps and they'd say, well, wait, what kind of question is that? That's really leading. We don't have to murder anybody. I'll volunteer to be the first one to swim alongside the raft, and then we'll take turns. Once I get too tired, the next one can jump in the water, and then we don't have to kill anybody. See, that would require some thinking, and that's not what they're supposed to do. So the way that this is supposed to go is they're supposed to say, well, which one is the most valuable to us? He's had a long life. Maybe we could just get rid of him. Right? And what does this do? Well, the child was told by his parents, by his pastor, by the Bible, that you shouldn't murder. And now they're in an ethical quandary. The only moral, ethical solution is for us to kill somebody. So what happens? Their parents, their pastor, and the Bible are all instantly discredited, and they now believe that morality depends on the situation. Your ethics are relative. Okay? This is by design. They planned it out that way, and they brag about it. Okay, Ronald Reagan, even before I was born, put together a commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said our very future as a nation and as a people is threatened by this educational system. They said if a foreign power had done it to us, we would have viewed it as an act of war, and we should. Okay? America wasn't always this dumbed down. In fact, early America was the most highly educated place on planet Earth. John Adams wrote in a letter to his friend that an American who can't read or write is as rare as a comet or an earthquake. Okay? The Federalist Papers, these were written for average people, farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, shoemakers, right? Go try to find a young person who can read them today. We've got a lot of data on early literacy in America. Some cities we had 100% literacy in places like Boston, 90% in other places. DuPont de Nemours in 1812 came out with a literacy study. He found that now more than 4 in 1,000 young people are unable to write legibly, even neatly. Okay, I can't write legibly, and I bet most of the people in this room can't either. We fell a long way, didn't we? The colonial education was incredible. And then I'll give you a very abbreviated history of how we got to where we are. See, the idea of government education was really radical when it was first proposed by this communist, Robert Owen. In fact, it was almost unthinkable. Parents and the church were doing just a fine and dandy job. Why would we want the government to educate our kids? Well, he wrote these essays, and they didn't catch on in America, but the Prussian ambassador took them back to Prussia, and the Prussian dictator said, hey, that's a good idea, let's do that. So he ordered the erection of a government school system. This guy, Robert Owen, communist before communism was cool, he actually set up a communist commune not far from here, in New Harmony, Indiana. And it failed almost immediately, took less than 2 years, because communism is ridiculous and anti-biblical. So he decided that the real solution here was to start getting the kids in government schools and shape them into good little collectivists. He formed a secret society to advance this agenda. And we know because there was a whistleblower, Orestes Brownson, and he wrote a book about this whole thing. He was actually one of the organizers for this secret society. Then he came to Christ, he repented of this wickedness, and he tried to blow the whistle. He said the great object was to get rid of Christianity. That was their main objective. So they did this by trying to shift public opinion and get men elected to the legislatures who would support government schools. Well, Horace Mann came on the scene late 1830s, early 1840s, and he brought the Prussian system from Prussia back to Massachusetts. He got himself selected as the first ever Secretary of Education of any one of our states, and he built a government school system in the state of Massachusetts. He built a training system for teachers to be trained by the government, and right away the quackery came in. He also rejected the Bible and biblical truth. He wanted the Bible out of schools. He said this would stop the sectarianism because, you know, Presbyterians don't necessarily agree with Lutherans and Baptists, so let's just get the Bible out and we'll be fine. Obviously that didn't fly. It took a long time before Americans were ready to swallow that pill, but that was his objective. Okay? He wanted to equalize all men using the public school system, and he introduced this method of teaching reading called the whole word method. Well, they tried it out in the schools in Boston, and within a couple of years, it was obvious that the kids couldn't learn how to read this way. So all the schoolmasters in Boston said, hey, this doesn't work, this is dumb, we're going to stop that right now. And that was the end of it. Until John Dewey came along, late 1800s, got some huge grants from the Rockefellers. They resurrected this quackery. Now, a little bit of background on John Dewey. He was an actual communist. He went over to the Soviet Union, and he loved what they were doing. You can read his articles about his trip to the Soviet Union. He especially loved their education system. He boasted that it was creating a collectivistic mentality in the children. Okay? He actually recognized that parents and teachers would not be okay with this, so we reprinted an essay that he wrote in the back of the book, Crimes of the Educators. He says, change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. So he knew they'd be tarred and feathered if parents caught on to what they were doing. He resurrected the whole word method of teaching reading until it was exposed in 1955 by Rudolf Flesch. Why Johnny can't read? The answer is simple, because the teaching of reading all over the United States, in all the textbooks, in all the schools, is completely wrong, flies in the face of all logic and common sense. So that was a big scandal. Now we've got the brain scans. We can actually see the physical damage this quackery is doing to children. And you're probably not surprised to know that under Common Core, this quackery is mandatory starting in kindergarten. You wonder why 50% of Americans on the federal government's data are either functionally illiterate or so close that we can lump them together? It's because they've been taught using this quack methodology. This is what it looks like. You get the kids to memorize sight words. Now, I want to spend a couple minutes on John Dewey's religion, too, because he was a religious man, not in the sense that we might understand, but he was one of the authors of the first Humanist Manifesto. And if you read the first Humanist Manifesto, the very first plank is that we religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Okay? Well, what does the Bible say? In the beginning, God created. Right off the bat, they're going to contradict Scripture. Even if you're not a Bible-believing Christian, there are important political implications to this, and I think you should be a Bible-believing Christian. But our founding fathers didn't think this was a controversial statement, that you had to be a Bible scholar. They said it's a self-evident truth that God created us and that He made us equal and that He gave us certain unalienable rights. Okay? This is actually, this humanist religion, it actually goes right back to the garden, right? You get to be your own little God. You get to know for yourself what's right and wrong. Mankind can be God, right? That's exactly what we heard from the snake in Genesis 3:5. So the Supreme Court established this religion in 1962 and 1963. They said no more prayer, no more Bible. And then one of the justices, Justice Potter Stewart, he said that refusal to permit religious exercises, this was in his dissent, is not the realization of a state of neutrality, but rather, he said, the establishment of a religion of secularism or humanism. So the Supreme Court, under the guise of the First Amendment, which says Congress shall not pass any laws, established a national religion and forced us to pay for it. So now we're moving toward a global education system. The UNESCO is taking a leading role here. Here's the head of the UN at an education conference convened by the UN talking about this. Oopsies.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
So global citizens, huh? And they're very
The
clear about
Education
this.
2030 agenda is our roadmap.
Okay, in the interest of time, we'll skip through that. But they're moving toward a global education system. This was Arne Duncan. He said UNESCO, the UN's education agency, is his global partner in turning our kids into green global citizens. He said education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world, and that it's now a global public good unconstrained by national boundaries. And that brings us to this guy, Robert Mueller. He was commissioned to write a World Core Curriculum. And you can find this on the UN's website. They say it should be taught in every school on the planet. And I want to teach you a little bit about this. So Robert Mueller wrote it, and in the foreword to the teacher's manual, he gives some really important insight. He says that the underlying philosophy upon which this is based will be found in the teachings of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Djwhal Khul. And to most people, that means nothing. Who's Alice Bailey? Well, I'll give you a hint. She was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. Now they call it the Lucius Trust because it was just a little too obvious. So they also, this Tibetan teacher, he's not Tibetan, he's not a teacher, he's not even a human being. He's one of these ascended masters. Alice Bailey claimed she was in communication with these spiritual entities. One of them was the Tibetan teacher Djwhal Khul. And her and this Tibetan wrote a book about education in the New Age. And they said, and I'm quoting, "World citizenship with a world federation and a world brain should be the goal of the enlightened." Okay? We just need to get there by fusing Marxism and neo-scholasticism using the methods advocated by John Dewey. And that's what they're doing. Okay? Bill Gates went over to UNESCO in 2004, and he actually signed an agreement with them to create global standards, global curricula, global teacher training programs, and global technological systems for planetary education. And then he came back 2 years later and started working on Common Core. You guys probably heard of Common Core. We talked about it a moment ago. Now, what's the relation between the UN's agenda and Common Core? I'm going to let them speak for themselves. This is a video, a commercial produced by the Common Core people explaining exactly what's going on.
Up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. Is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. The standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too.
Match up against
now
international
we know how we're
standards.
doing compared to just about
We got
everyone.
Seattle,
So
Chicago,
even though local
Shanghai,
communities
and
will
Paris.
still design their own curriculum with the same rules, everybody can compete on the same kind of staircase.
So it's them telling you, it's the Common Core people telling you this matches up with the international standards. It's not me saying that, that's them, okay? So, last couple minutes here, everything I just showed you is a fact, okay? You can find the documents, you saw the videos, it's not my opinion. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes of my opinion, and then we're going to go to God's Word, which is ultimately the only opinion that matters, because we need to ask some fundamental questions about all this. Obviously, we've got a problem. What kind of solutions can we look forward to? The first question is, can we reform this system? And I would submit to you that no, we can't. It's working exactly as intended. When people say the education system is broken, I say, no, you just don't understand. It's working perfectly. It was designed to turn your children into illiterate morons who hate God and hate their family. That was the goal. When it comes to that, it's doing a fantastic job, okay? So, as I see it, we have two options. We get our kids out as quickly as we possibly can, or you get ready for that little new world order that they were talking about, where you will have no freedom and everything you love will be flipped upside down. We need a Dunkirk operation here. I borrowed this term from my friend E. Ray Moore. The British Army was trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, totally surrounded by the Nazis, the National Socialists, about to be annihilated. British people got on their knees and they prayed and they said, God, we need a miracle. Then they got to work. Every resource in their society was put at the disposal of this rescue operation. Everything that could float went across the English Channel to pick up those boys and bring them home, and they lived to fight another day, and they're not speaking German today on the British Isles. For parents, think of the government school building like it's on fire. Okay, what do you do if the government school building is on fire and your child is inside? Well, first you start a petition, then you run for school board. Okay, very good, right? So you run inside and you grab the child and you run out the door. Okay, and honestly, it's worse than a fire. A fire is just going to hurt your kids physically. The schools are destroying your kids physically, mentally, academically, emotionally. We've got to get them out, folks. And grandparents, you can play a role here too. Pastors, priests, rabbis, if you're a shepherd in your congregation and the young ones in your congregation are being devoured by satanic wolves, you need to step in and say, guys, got to keep track of your kids, right? Something's going on here. So I hope pastors will talk about this. Now, COVID has had a really incredible silver lining. Enrollment in the government's indoctrination centers is dropping like a rock. A lot of districts have lost 10 to 12% of their victims. That is very good news. When I first started telling people they needed to get their kids out, it was like fringe and radical. Now the tide is turning, okay? Rush Limbaugh, before he died, and the year before he died, 3 times he said, parents, get your kids out of the public schools. Franklin Graham, one of the biggest evangelical leaders in America. Parents, you've got to get your children out of the public schools. He was speaking on Todd Starnes' show about the LGBT law in New Jersey. Even President Trump, we've got to protect our children from these failing government schools. They were all correct. So what does the Bible say about these things? Well, Proverbs 22:6 says that Caesar should train up the child in the way that he should go. And you guys are like, nah. No, he doesn't say that. Right? Of course, parents should train up the children in the way they should go. And then Caesar should teach Caesar's laws to the children. No, right? Parents, all the time you need to be teaching. Not just when Caesar doesn't have your kids. It's when you wake up, when you sit down for eating, when you're walking by the way, when you're going to bed, all the time, God puts you in charge of your kids. Okay? Ephesians 6:4, raise up your children in the fear and the discipline and the admonition of the Lord. Proverbs 9:10, right? Something about education. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You can't even mention the Lord in a public school today. You think they're going to get any wisdom or knowledge? If you believe the Bible, you know that's self-evidently ludicrous. They're not going to get any wisdom or knowledge there, right? What happens with no knowledge? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, Hosea 4:6 tells us. In Mark 12, Jesus says we should render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Do your children belong to Caesar? Keep sending them to public school. If not, you need to think about it. Okay? God also said, Jesus said in Matthew 12, verse 30, whoever is not with me is against me. He said the same thing in Luke. Okay? Are the public schools with Christ? Yes or no answer? Okay, then we know who they're with. Okay? Pretty simple. Martin Luther said the school has become the great gates of hell. Harvard was one time a decent school, believe it or not, 400 years ago. Their mission statement was that the primary purpose of your education is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. That was the main purpose of your education. We have self-government is very important. Now, homeschooling, I think, is the gold standard. Homeschooling is exploding. Just in the last year, the number of homeschool families has more than doubled, according to the Census Bureau's data. That is really, really good news. All these men here were primarily homeschooled, and they created the greatest, freest country in the history of humanity. Now, the homeschool data is just amazing, right? Homeschoolers are running circles around the victims of government schools. They're scoring in the 90th percentile on the government standardized test. They're better socialized. They're winning all the competitions, the spelling bees, the science fairs. They are dominating. There's a lot of good private schools out there, but buyer beware. Don't just send your kid to any random private school. You've got to do your due diligence. We've got some magazines out front that kind of outline all of this argument, the Rescuing Our Children. They mentioned that we formed the Ministry Public School Exit. Well, Illinois Family Institute is our partner here in the state of Illinois. Please get some materials on your way out. Guys, I think this is the critical fight. All the other fights that we're fighting, they all come back to this. Our children are being discipled not by parents, not by the church, but by a government that hates God and hates family. Now, the UN wants to shut this down. The Harvard lawyers want to shut down homeschooling. They want a presumptive ban. They're brainwashing. They're dumbing down. And I just want to end on this scripture because I don't want anybody to think it's just like a political battle or even an educational battle, right? Homeschooling is not going to save your children. Jesus Christ saves your children. So we need to understand what we're really dealing with here. And I think it should be obvious by now, but just to put a very clear, explicit understanding of what's going on here in your minds, we'll go to Ephesians 6:12. God says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Right? It's not just bad guys doing this to our kids. It's powers, principalities, the rulers of the darkness of this world, and spiritual wickedness in high places. That's all I have, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Alex, thank you so much. Alex, could you take a couple questions here? Okay. You briefly talked about it, but parents are increasingly saying, I've had enough, I want to get my kids out. They're looking to homeschools, and they're also looking to Christian schools. But if more and more people do that, you know very well that the left will say, hey, we're going to put some restrictions on you. Or we're going to say, you can't do that unless you're teaching this. How do we counter that?
Yeah, excellent question. And actually, we're starting to see that already. Politicians are now trying to target homeschoolers, and I suspect we're going to see a really intensified campaign here soon. They'll probably try to find some family that, you know, maybe abused the kids or the kids didn't do very well, and they'll say, look, that's what homeschoolers are doing. So we've got to be very, very active in this battle. The homeschool community, you know, I think a lot of homeschoolers think, well, you know, I'm homeschooling my kids, so I'm good. I'll just retreat and, you know, we'll just hang out at our house. No, we've got to be active out there in the public square. We've got to be dealing with our legislators. If our legislators aren't supportive, we've got to run against them. So we do have to be active in the political sphere, but we need to be clear about educating the public. You know, when they talk about we need to regulate homeschoolers because we need to make sure they're learning properly. Excuse me. According to your own data, less than 1/3 of the victims in your brainwash camps can do math or can do English. So let's fix the government schools, then let's talk about the homeschoolers who are running circles around the brainwash camps. So, you know, short answer, we've got to be very, very highly involved. We've got to be involved. I know a lot of people in church don't want to be involved in the political realm. Hey, I don't want to be involved either, okay? It's not what I would choose to do with my time, but our children are worth it. Our future is worth it. We've got to stay active.
All right, this is Delbra Pratt, Alex, and Delbra is with the Illinois Prayer Caucus Network.
So are you giving us a dual purpose of, first of all, save our kids, get our kids out of public school, but then do we stay the battle for the public school where there are kids that don't have parents who will fight the fight?
Great, great question. And what I tell parents is, you know, just again, think of the school like it's on fire. If it's on fire, your first responsibility is to get your children out and protect them. And then we still have another problem. The building's on fire, it might burn down our whole town, and there are other children stuck inside that burning building. So how would we approach that? Well, first we'd want to let the town know that the building's on fire and that the children are being burned up. So I think that's a critical thing that people can do. It's not just take your kids out and just retreat to your home and wait for the rapture. Okay, we've got to let the town know the building's on fire, the children are being destroyed. So everybody has a sphere of influence. You can start there. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your elected officials, talk to your pastor, the elders. Let them know what's happening. A lot of pastors don't know. If they knew, they would tell their congregation. So we've got to get the word out. And, you know, I don't want to discourage people from running for school board or from, you know, running for legislature and trying school reform. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor after you've protected your own children. You know, maybe you don't have any children. So it's a good thing to do. But just with the understanding that public school reform, I think, is a dead end. You know, the Titanic is sinking. To rearrange the deck chairs or, you know, polish the door handles is really, I think there's better things we could use our time on. And as part of public school exit, you know, you mentioned the families with low income, things like that. We want to make sure that there is no child who has to be trapped in a government school. So we've actually got a scholarship fund now. The state of Illinois has a wonderful program here where parents who want, or people who want to write, I think it's 75% off of your taxes, you can write it. Invest in kids. So if you're in Illinois, look that up. It's a great way. Instead of giving money to the government so they can murder babies and brainwash children, you can give that money to a foundation, a fund, and then they can use that for a scholarship for children. So part of what we're doing at Public School Exit, we do want to give scholarships to children, truly low income. I mean, if you're you know, you're driving a 2019 Mercedes and you got a vacation house in Colorado, you know, we're not going to help you get your kids out. You just got to reorganize your priorities. But yeah, good question. And one of our board members, I'll just say this last thing. One of our board members at Public School Exit is a wonderful lady. She spent 4 years as the superintendent of public instruction in the state of Arizona, the highest official in the education world in the state of Arizona. And wonderful lady. She went in there thinking, I'm going to reform this. We're going to get Common Core out. We're going to stop the sexualization of the kids. We're going to get them phonics so they can learn how to read. And after 4 years, she said, hey, I want to work with you guys. You can't reform this monstrosity. We've got to get the kids out. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
So with these scholarships you're talking about, you referred to, we want to give new meaning to No Child Left Behind.
Amen. Amen.
All right. Your question, sir.
Yeah, so a year and a half ago, I picked up the Bible, became a born-again Christian, and thanks. And I got 3 young boys now, and I listen to Tony Perkins a lot, bought radio, and ran for school board, got on school board, but I guess my question is what advice would you really have to help fight against, like, the culturally responsive teacher mandate, and don't say move to Texas or Florida?
You know, I wouldn't say move to Texas or Florida because the situation is almost as bad there. I think people struggle to believe that the education system in Florida or Texas is almost as bad as it is here, but it is. I can tell you that for a fact. So what to do on the school board? I think the main thing that a school board member can do that is effective is raise awareness, because the media will quote you if you're a school board member. You have more authority, and parents assume that you have more knowledge. So when they hear a school board member saying the schools are dumbing down your kids, the schools are brainwashing your kids, the schools are teaching your kids critical race theory, they're teaching your kids to hate kids based on their race or hate themselves based on their race, from a school board member, it means a lot more than from the crazy uncle or the wackadoodle neighbor or whatever. So I would say try to raise awareness. The laws in every state about the authority of school board members are different. But I know in Florida, for example, when somebody gets elected to the school board, they fly them to Tallahassee for an orientation. And, you can sum up the weekend orientation. It's basically you have no power. You can help negotiate salaries, and you can decide whether the kids should wear uniforms or not. But that's it. Your curriculum is going to come from the state. The standards are going to come from the state. Your book selection, you can pick from these books that the state has chosen. And, of course, all those go right back to the federal government, and all those are then now, as you guys know, linked in with the international standards that are emerging. So, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot a school board member can do, but raising awareness is just critical.
You talked about the proficiency standards of students, math, science, etc. What about the proficiency rate of the teachers? You know anything about that?
I know some about that, yeah, and actually, I'm always careful when I say this, because there's a lot of people who are well-meaning who go into teaching thinking they're going to try to help kids. But what I argue is that teachers are in many cases just as much victims as the children. They went to a state college for 4 years and they thought they were going to learn how to educate children. Instead, they were brainwashed with this exact same garbage that they're expected to push on children. They were taught that the way you teach reading is by having children memorize whole words by sight instead of by teaching them to decode it using phonics. And so this is what they were taught. A lot of them don't realize that the things that they're doing are very, very harmful to children. In many cases, that's in their worldview. But it is a fact that, of all the colleges in an average university, education college will typically have the lowest performing students, the lower grades, lower SAT scores, et cetera. And really at this point, it has become like 4 years of ideological indoctrination more than education when they go get an education degree. So,
all right, let's thank Alex
Newman.
You, guys.